For $10, anyone could have taken the aging German Shepherd. But the woman holding his leash was not trying to abandon him. She was trying to save him. When a former Navy SEAL stepped closer, the dog reacted to a forgotten military command. That impossible moment opened the door to a stolen home, a fallen soldier, and a secret that had been waiting years to return. Before we begin, tell us what city you're watching from today, and please subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable stories of courage, loyalty, and second chances. Sleet swept sideways across Duluth's lakefront, striking the empty benches and black pavement, while Lake Superior disappeared beneath a wall of iron-gray mist. Ryan Mercer stepped out of the discount store with a brown paper bag held tightly against his ribs. At 41, he was tall and lean rather than bulky, with broad shoulders that had narrowed after years of missed meals and sleepless nights. His dark brown hair was clipped short, silver beginning to show above both temples, and a close beard softened none of the hard angles around his jaw. A thin scar crossed one knuckle, but his face carried no visible wounds. The deeper ones lived behind his pale blue eyes, which still measured doors, windows, hands, and distances before they allowed him to notice anything beautiful. Inside the bag were rice, canned soup, discounted bread, 6 eggs, and the cheapest pain medication he could find. Ryan had once handled military dogs for a Navy SEAL unit. Now he survived on disability payments, counted every dollar twice, and avoided places where strangers might ask what he used to be. He was halfway toward the bus stop when he saw the cardboard sign beneath a leafless maple tree at the edge of the waterfront park. Old German Shepherd, $10. The woman sitting behind it looked 29, though exhaustion had pulled years across her face. Hannah Whitmore was slender, almost fragile beneath a faded brown coat 2 sizes too large, with fair skin reddened by the cold and long chestnut hair escaping from a loose braid. Her gray-green eyes remained lowered, not from weakness, but from the practiced caution of someone who had learned that meeting the wrong person's stare could invite trouble. One gloveless hand gripped a worn leather leash. The other rested on the shoulder of the dog beside her. Major was an 11-year-old German Shepherd, black and tan beneath the wetness darkening his coat. Silver fur covered his muzzle and circled his deep brown eyes, while his left ear leaned slightly outward as if age had finally persuaded it to relax. He was large but underweight, his hips too visible, his hind legs stiff with arthritis. Yet nothing about him appeared defeated. He lay close to Hannah's boots, body positioned between her and the path, watching 2 men who stood much closer than decency required. The taller man wore a Navy work jacket marked with the white Harbor Point Property Services logo. Derek Holt was perhaps 40, long-faced and sharp-nosed, with slick dark hair, a narrow mustache, and the polished smile of a man who preferred cruelty to sound like professional advice. Beside him stood Vince Keller, a thick-shouldered man in his mid-30s with a shaved head, reddish stubble, and restless hands. Vince had the impatient temperament of someone who mistook another person's fear for permission. $10? Vince said, nudging the wet cardboard with his boot. That dog probably costs more to bury. Hannah's fingers tightened around the leash. He isn't for you. Derek smiled down at her. You're sitting on public property advertising a sale. That makes it everyone's business. Ryan slowed. The old part of him, the part that still wanted silence more than justice, told him to keep walking. He had food for 3 days, pain in his right shoulder, and no room in his life for another disaster. But Major's eyes shifted toward Vince's hand, and Ryan recognized the calculation inside them. The dog was measuring whether his failing body could still reach danger before danger reached Hannah. Vince leaned down and reached for the leash. Major pushed himself upright. The movement was painfully slow. His hind legs trembled, claws scraping the frozen pavement. But once he stood, he placed his body squarely in front of Hannah. No barking, no snapping, only a low growl and the quiet dignity of an old soldier reporting for one more duty. Ryan set his grocery bag down. The eggs clicked softly together. "That's far enough," he said. Derek turned first. His gaze traveled over Ryan's worn jacket, faded jeans, and weathered boots. He saw poverty and assumed weakness. "This doesn't concern you." "It does now." Vince straightened, grinning as if another target had improved his afternoon. "You buying the dog?" Ryan did not answer. He watched Vince's shoulders, the angle of his feet, the hand still hovering near Major's leash. Years ago, Ryan had learned that dangerous men often announce themselves through small movements before courage reached their mouths. Hannah looked at him, fear and suspicion fighting across her face. She did not know whether Ryan was help or merely a different kind of threat. That uncertainty struck him harder than he expected. He remembered people once looking at him with trust before he had earned it. He also remembered the day that stopped happening. Vince stepped forward. Ryan's hand rose automatically, palm angled down, 2 fingers tightening into the old military signal for hold position. Major froze. The growl stopped, but the dog did not retreat. His feet planted evenly. His head lifted. His eyes locked forward with perfect discipline. Every line of his aging body suddenly controlled. Ryan felt the sleet against his face but no longer noticed the cold. A family dog did not respond that way by accident. Derek noticed Ryan's surprise and used it as an opening. He caught Vince by the sleeve and pulled him back. "Come on, we have work to do." Before leaving, Derek tapped the Harbor Point logo on his chest and looked at Hannah. "Enjoy the park while you can. By Monday morning, that lakehouse won't belong to you either." Hannah's face lost what little color the cold had left in it. Derek and Vince walked toward a dark pickup parked near the road, Vince muttering while Derek kept the satisfied posture of a man who believed the ending had already been signed. Ryan waited until the truck disappeared into the sleet. Then he looked down at Major, who still held the signal with flawless patience. "What's his name?" "Major?" Hannah whispered. Ryan lowered his hand. Major relaxed, though his eyes remained watchful. Ryan's chest tightened around a memory he could not yet see clearly. "Why does Major understand a military hand signal?" Hannah raised her gray-green eyes to his. "My brother taught him before he died." The sleet softened into wet snow, gathering in Hannah's chestnut hair and along Major's silver muzzle as the 3 of them remained beneath the bare maple tree. Ryan picked up his grocery bag but did not step closer. He had learned that frightened people often feared kindness most when it arrived too quickly. Hannah folded the cardboard sign against her coat until the words disappeared. "I wasn't trying to get rid of him," she said. Her voice carried shame, though Ryan saw no cruelty in her face, only exhaustion. She explained that she had spent several nights beneath an awning behind a closed laundromat, where the wind reached them from both ends and Major's joints stiffened before morning. She wanted someone with a heater, soft food, and enough patience not to punish an old dog for moving slowly. Major had once been strong enough to pull her brother across a frozen yard. Now, climbing a curb made his hind legs tremble. Hannah had hoped $10 would discourage people looking for a free animal while still attracting someone who genuinely intended to care for him. Ryan glanced at her hands. The skin around her knuckles was cracked from cold, and her fingers shook even when the wind briefly stopped. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "I'm fine." "That wasn't what I asked." She looked toward the lake. "Yesterday morning." Major lowered his head, and Ryan noticed a faint smell of canned chicken on the dog's breath. Hannah admitted that she had spent her last few dollars on a small container of soft meat because Major could no longer chew hard food comfortably. Ryan felt an old pressure beneath his ribs. He had known men who divided water by rank and mothers who lied about hunger so their children would finish dinner. Love often looked foolish to people who had never been forced to choose what suffered first. "My apartment is 6 blocks away," Ryan said. Hannah's shoulders tightened. He expected that. "I'm not buying Major. You keep the leash, you keep your money, and you leave whenever you want. I have heat, hot water, and a door that locks from the inside." She studied him carefully. Ryan knew what she saw: a tall stranger with a hard face, tired eyes, and the controlled stillness of someone who might be dangerous. He did not blame her. "You'll have the spare key," he added. "I'll sleep near the door." Hannah looked down at Major. The old shepherd had begun shifting his weight from one hind leg to the other, trying to hide his discomfort. That decided it. "Only for tonight," she said. "Only for tonight," Ryan agreed. His apartment occupied the second floor of a faded brick building several streets from the lake. The hallway smelled of dust, old paint, and damp wool. Ryan unlocked the door, stepped inside, and immediately saw the room through Hannah's eyes. A cold coffee mug sat beside unpaid utility notices. One boot faced the door while the other lay beneath a chair. A folded military cot leaned against the wall, and a dark storage trunk rested under the kitchen table, untouched long enough to gather a clean line of dust. The place was not filthy. It was abandoned by the man still living inside it. Ryan moved quickly, gathering papers and pushing clothes into one corner. "It looked better before I started fixing it," he said. Hannah almost smiled. Major entered slowly, sniffed the floor, then chose the warmest place beside the radiator. Ryan pulled the cot open for Hannah and placed a folded blanket on it. He took a small brass key from a kitchen drawer and set it in the center of the table. "That's yours while you're here. The bathroom window opens to the fire escape. The front lock works without a key from inside." Hannah stared at the key as if it were more valuable than money. Ryan understood. A key was not merely permission to enter. Sometimes it was permission to leave. He cooked rice in a dented pot, warmed canned beans, and scrambled 4 eggs. From the back of his refrigerator, he removed the last piece of cooked chicken, shredded it into warm water, and set the bowl before Major. Hannah noticed the sacrifice but said nothing. Ryan divided the human meal unevenly, giving her the fuller plate. She objected once. He ignored her with the practiced stubbornness of a man who had spent years giving commands under worse circumstances. They ate while snow tapped softly against the window. After several minutes, Hannah pulled a folded packet of documents from inside her coat. She told Ryan about her mother, Linda Whitmore, who had died 5 weeks earlier after a long illness. Linda had been a small, fair-skinned woman with auburn hair that faded to copper gray in her final years. She had worked in a dry cleaning shop by day and cleaned hotel rooms during tourist season, developing the quiet endurance of someone who believed every problem could be survived if she kept moving. After Hannah's father died, Linda raised Hannah and her older brother Jason alone, refusing help until illness finally made refusal impossible. Harbor Point approached while she was hospitalized, offering to assess repairs on the family's lakehouse. Hannah, exhausted and afraid, signed several forms she believed granted access for inspection and maintenance. After the funeral, she returned home and found new locks on the doors. A Harbor Point representative told her the property was already moving toward transfer. Ryan read the clearest surviving copy twice. The document authorized estimates, photographs, and limited repair access. It did not transfer ownership. It did not authorize removal of property. It did not contain language surrendering Hannah's rights. "This isn't a sale agreement," he said. Hannah looked at him, hope appearing so cautiously it seemed afraid of being noticed. Ryan warned her that the paper did not solve everything, but it meant Harbor Point's story was incomplete. Major finished eating and settled beside the radiator, his eyes following Ryan as if evaluating whether the room had become safe enough to sleep in. Ryan carried the empty bowl to the sink. Without thinking, he gave a short, low whistle. 2 notes he had once used to call Atlas back to his side. Atlas had been a powerful sable German shepherd with a dark mask, amber eyes, and the rare ability to become completely still amid gunfire. He had worked beside Ryan for 6 years before dying during the mission that ended Ryan's military life and hollowed out everything that followed. Major's head snapped toward him. The old dog rose halfway, ears lifted, eyes fixed on Ryan with immediate recognition. Hannah's face turned pale. "That whistle," she whispered. Jason used the same one. Night settled over Duluth beneath wet snow and a hard wind from Lake Superior, while the old apartment building answered the cold with groaning pipes and trembling window glass. Ryan lay awake on the thin sleeping mat near the front door, one forearm across his chest and his boots placed within reach. Hannah slept on the folding cot against the warmer wall, still wearing a sweater beneath the blanket, as though comfort might vanish if she trusted it too completely. Major rested between them, his silver muzzle on his paws and his old body angled toward the entrance. The apartment had been quiet for nearly an hour when a heating pipe struck inside the wall with a sudden metallic crack. Ryan's eyes opened, but he no longer saw the dim kitchen or the snow moving beyond the window. The sound became something else in his mind: metal hitting concrete, equipment falling in darkness, a warning swallowed by shouting. His body reacted before memory formed. His shoulders locked, his hand closed around the edge of the mat, and the room seemed to narrow until there was no air left inside it. He tried to breathe slowly, but every breath stopped high in his chest. He knew where he was. He knew the year, the city, and the locked door only a few feet away. None of that mattered to the part of him still trapped in the mission that had taken Atlas. Another pipe knocked. Ryan pushed himself halfway upright, his pale blue eyes fixed on an enemy the apartment did not contain. Major lifted his head. The 11-year-old German shepherd did not bark or rush forward. He rose with visible effort, his stiff hind legs trembling beneath his lean, black and tan frame, then crossed the room one careful step at a time. He stopped several feet from Ryan, close enough to be seen, but far enough not to trap him. Major sat, lowered his gray muzzle, and began breathing slowly. In, out, in, out. The rhythm was steady and deliberate, almost exaggerated. Ryan's gaze found the movement of the dog's ribs. He followed it without deciding to. The radiator returned first, then the window, the kitchen chair, the brass key on the table. His fingers loosened. The air stopped tasting like dust and returned to cold metal, old paint, and the faint remains of cooked rice. Hannah had awakened, but she stayed on the cot. Her chestnut hair hung loose around her fair, tired face, and her gray-green eyes watched without pity. She understood restraint because fear had taught her how damaging unwanted closeness could be. "Major helps people better when no one orders them to calm down," she said quietly. Ryan rested his back against the wall. He wanted to apologize for frightening her, then realized she had not asked him to. Major remained seated until Ryan's breathing matched his own. Only then did the old dog lower himself beside the mat with a weary sigh. Ryan placed one hand on the floor near Major's paw, not touching him, merely allowing the distance between them to become smaller. The next several days changed the apartment in ways Ryan noticed but rarely mentioned. Hannah washed the dishes before they could gather in the sink and folded the towels into neat squares near the stove. She moved carefully through the rooms, never opening a drawer without asking, as if permission were a debt that had to be repaid through invisibility. Major claimed the patch of floor beside the radiator and began supervising the household with grave disapproval. Whenever Ryan left one boot turned away from the door, Major pushed it with his nose until it faced the proper direction. The first time, Hannah laughed. The sound was brief and surprised, as though it had escaped without approval. Ryan nearly smiled, then hid it by reaching for his coffee. In the afternoons, when the snow softened and the service alley behind the building remained empty, Ryan showed Hannah a few ways to protect her space. He did not call it combat training. He taught her to stand with one foot slightly behind the other, to keep her hands visible, and to angle her body so she always had somewhere to move. Hannah apologized whenever she misunderstood. Ryan finally lowered his hands and said, "You say sorry before anyone accuses you of anything." She looked embarrassed. "It keeps people from getting angry." "No," Ryan replied. "It teaches angry people that pressure works." The words struck deeper than he intended. Hannah's face tightened, but she nodded. He showed her how to say, "Step back," without adding "please," because courtesy was wasted on someone testing fear. Major watched from the stairwell, one ear raised, occasionally sitting before Ryan gave the signal as though the lesson had gone on too long. On the fourth evening, Hannah removed a photograph from the cloth bag she kept beneath the cot. The picture showed the Whitmore family outside their lake house during late summer. Linda stood in the center, small and straight-backed, her auburn hair touched by early gray, and her pale face lined by years of work rather than bitterness. Hannah was younger beside her, smiling without caution. Jason stood on the other side in army fatigues. He had been 26 in the photograph, tall and athletic, with warm brown skin, closely cut black hair, a clean-shaven square jaw, and dark eyes that appeared gentle despite the uniform. Major lay at his boots, younger and heavier, his muzzle still entirely black. Jason's hand rested loosely on the dog's neck. "He never pulled Major toward him," Hannah said. "He waited for Major to choose the distance." Ryan stared too long. A memory stirred. Rotor noise above a dusty training field, men shouting over machinery, Atlas shaking beside a fence. Ryan pulled the military storage trunk from beneath the table after Hannah went to sleep. Inside were old patches, field notebooks, photographs, and Atlas's worn leather identification collar. Atlas had been a 6-year-old sable German shepherd then, powerful through the chest with amber eyes, a dark mask, and an intense nature that made strangers call him fearless. Ryan had known better. Atlas was brave because he felt fear and continued working through it. Near the bottom of an envelope, Ryan found the photograph he needed. A younger Ryan stood beside several handlers and support soldiers. In the rear row, Jason Whitmore was crouched next to Atlas while a helicopter hovered beyond the fence. Jason had not restrained the trembling dog. He had simply remained beside him, shoulders relaxed, one hand resting on the ground until Atlas chose to lean closer. Ryan remembered him now, not for a medal, a speech, or a heroic act, but for understanding that strength sometimes meant refusing to force a frightened creature forward. The following evening, Ryan placed both photographs side by side on the table. Hannah touched her brother's face with one finger, tears filling her eyes without falling. Major lay beneath the table as though guarding the small bridge between the dead and the living. Then his head rose sharply. A low growl moved through his chest. Ryan followed the dog's stare toward the window. Across the snow-covered street, a dark pickup bearing the Harbor Point logo sat beneath a broken street lamp. A man inside held a phone toward the apartment, taking photographs. The Harbor Point pickup remained across the street until dawn, its headlights dark beneath the falling snow, but the faint glow of a phone screen still appeared behind the windshield whenever someone inside lifted it toward Ryan's apartment. Ryan did not confront the driver. He closed the curtains, photographed the truck through a narrow gap, and wrote down the license plate before it disappeared into the gray morning. By 9, he had Hannah, Major, and the surviving paperwork inside the Duluth Veterans Resource Center, a modest brick office where the heat ran too high and framed service photographs covered one wall. Frank Donovan met them near the reception desk. He was 62, broad through the chest but softened by age, with short silver hair, a square face, and a thick white mustache that made him look stern until he spoke. His left knee had never healed properly after an accident during his Army years, leaving him with a slight limp and an unusual patience for anyone forced to move more slowly than the world preferred. Frank had helped Ryan through several VA appeals and had learned not to ask veterans to explain pain before offering them a chair. He looked at Hannah's tired face, Major's stiff hind legs, and Ryan's clenched jaw, then led them into a private office without wasting time on polite questions. "Show me what you have," he said. Ryan placed the Harbor Point authorization form, photographs of the truck, and Hannah's county notices across the desk. Frank read each page carefully, his heavy fingers flattening the corners. He did not promise anything. Men who had spent years helping desperate people knew promises could become another kind of cruelty. Instead, he called Rebecca Lane, a housing attorney working with a legal aid organization near downtown. Rebecca arrived less than an hour later, carrying a canvas briefcase and wearing a charcoal wool coat dusted with snow. She was 44, tall and slender, with warm brown skin, tightly curled black hair cut just below her ears, and dark, steady eyes behind narrow, rectangular glasses. Her face was elegant but unsmiling, and she spoke with the economical precision of someone who had learned that frightened clients needed clear truth more than comforting language. A childhood eviction had shaped her career. When she was 11, her mother had packed their belongings into grocery boxes while a landlord watched from the porch. Rebecca rarely shared that history, but it had left her with little tolerance for companies that treated confusion as consent. Rebecca spread the documents across Frank's desk and traced several lines with a capped pen. Harbor Point had permission to inspect the Whitmore property, photograph damage, and submit repair estimates. It did not have a deed, a completed transfer, or written authority to remove personal belongings. Yet, a notice attached to the county file claimed an interior clearing would begin Monday morning at 8. "They're calling it preservation work," Rebecca said, "which means they may argue they're protecting an abandoned property." Hannah stared at her. "It isn't abandoned. Then we need proof that your mother rejected the sale and that you never surrendered possession." Rebecca checked the clock. It was Saturday morning. County offices would close within hours, and an emergency injunction would require more than Hannah's word against a corporation's paperwork. "You have 48 hours," Rebecca said. "Less, if the weather gets worse." Hannah's hand moved automatically toward Major's collar. The old shepherd leaned into her knee. Ryan asked what document would matter most. Rebecca said a notarized declaration from Linda refusing transfer, preferably with a date after Harbor Point's offer. Hannah remembered seeing such a paper months earlier, folded into a blue envelope. Jason had once kept important family documents in the small workshop behind the lakehouse because Linda distrusted filing cabinets after a basement flood ruined years of records. Ryan looked at the snow thickening outside. "Then we go now." The Whitmore house stood north of the city on a narrow road overlooking Lake Superior, where the wind drove snow across the pavement in pale ribbons. The house was smaller than Ryan expected, with weathered white siding, a sagging porch rail, and dark windows facing the lake. Hannah stopped at the end of the path. Grief moved across her face before she could hide it. She had returned expecting damage. She had not expected the place to look as if it had already forgotten her. A Harbor Point notice covered the front window. The original lock had been replaced by a bright steel cylinder, and through the glass they could see furniture gathered into piles. Chairs had been stacked against the wall. Kitchen boxes sat open on the floor. The family photographs had been removed and placed face down on a table. Hannah pressed her palm to the window. For one terrible moment, Ryan thought she might collapse. He stood close enough to catch her but did not touch her. She breathed once, then again, using the steady rhythm Major had offered him in the dark. "The workshop," she said. They moved around the side of the house, Major struggling through snow that reached above his paws. Ryan offered to carry him, but the old dog pulled gently forward, nose low, as though returning to familiar ground had awakened something stronger than pain. The workshop stood behind a line of bare lilac bushes, its wooden door swollen by moisture but still secured with an old padlock. Hannah found the spare key beneath a loose stone near the foundation, exactly where Jason had hidden it years earlier. Inside, the air smelled of cold metal, cedar shavings, and engine oil. Jason's shelves remained almost untouched. A rusted lantern, fishing tackle, military magazines, a cracked thermos, and a row of labeled coffee cans filled with screws. Major ignored the shelves and tugged Hannah toward a workbench in the back corner. Beneath it sat a green metal box marked with Jason's initials. Ryan lifted the box onto the bench while Hannah worked the stiff latch. Inside were property tax receipts, repair estimates, copies of medical bills, and 3 letters from Harbor Point offering increasingly lower prices for the house. Beneath them lay Linda's handwritten list of every phone call, visit, and threat she had received. The last entry read, "Derek said repairs would become county action if I refused again." Hannah's breathing quickened. Rebecca could use the list to establish pressure, but it was not the notarized declaration. They searched every folder, envelope, and drawer. Ryan checked beneath the metal lining. Hannah opened Jason's old field manuals one by one. Major sniffed around the base of the bench, then sat with a tired groan. The blue envelope was gone. Hannah pressed both hands against the cold workbench. She kept it here. I know she did. Ryan believed her, but belief would not stop the clearing crew on Monday. He gathered the remaining papers into a waterproof bag. At least they had evidence of Linda's repeated refusals and Harbor Point's pressure. It was not enough yet, but it was more than they had brought. As they stepped outside, twilight had already begun swallowing the lake. Snow moved heavily between the trees, softening the road and erasing their footprints almost as soon as they made them. Ryan closed the workshop door and turned toward the house. Headlights suddenly blazed at the far end of the driveway. The dark Harbor Point pickup idled beyond the gate, blocking the only clear path to the road. Derek stood beside the open driver's door in his Navy Company jacket, one hand resting on the roof. Vince remained inside, his shaved head visible behind the windshield. Derek's narrow face held the same polished smile he had worn in the park, but the distance and weather had stripped away its pretense of friendliness. His voice carried through the snow. "You're looking for a paper we took a long time ago." Snow thickened between Ryan and the Harbor Point truck, turning Derek's narrow figure into a dark shape beneath the headlights. Ryan felt Hannah tense beside him, but he did not answer the threat or move toward the driveway. Confrontation was what Derek wanted. A shove, a raised voice, one photograph taken at the right angle. Anything Harbor Point could use to describe Ryan as a violent former soldier trespassing on disputed property. Instead, Ryan lifted his phone, photographed Derek, Vince, the truck, and the blocked gate, then guided Hannah and Major toward an old service lane behind the workshop. The path was narrow and nearly buried, but it curved through the trees and joined the main road half a mile north. Derek shouted after them, his voice losing confidence when Ryan refused to perform the role prepared for him. Major struggled through the deep snow, so Ryan finally lifted the old shepherd into his arms. Major weighed less than he should have, but his chest remained broad and warm against Ryan's coat. Hannah carried the waterproof bag of documents pressed beneath her jacket. They reached Ryan's car without being followed and returned to Duluth as darkness covered the lake. At the apartment, Ryan photographed every page twice, while Hannah arranged Linda's notes by date. They emailed the copies to Rebecca Lane and Frank Donovan, then placed the originals inside the military storage trunk. Rebecca replied within minutes. The letters showed a clear pattern of pressure, but the missing notarized declaration was still their strongest potential evidence. She instructed them to keep the doors locked, preserve every message, and call the police if Harbor Point appeared again. Ryan did not tell Hannah that men like Derek often became more reckless when paperwork began closing around them. He checked the fire escape, tested the window locks, and slid a length of paracord into his jacket pocket before going to sleep. The apartment grew quiet after midnight. Hannah lay on the cot with her phone charging beside her. Ryan rested near the door, though sleep came only in shallow pieces. Major remained beneath the kitchen table, his gray muzzle between his paws. At 2:17 a.m., the shepherd raised his head. His ears turned toward the hallway before the faint scrape of metal reached Ryan. Major stood, slow but silent, and a low growl rolled through his chest. Ryan opened his eyes and listened. Someone was testing the lock with a thin tool. He moved to Hannah and touched the wooden frame of the cot instead of her shoulder. She woke immediately. "Camera," he whispered. "Stay behind the kitchen wall." Fear widened her gray-green eyes, but she nodded. Ryan tied one end of the paracord around the heavy shelf near the entrance and stretched the line low behind the door. It was not designed to injure anyone. It would only steal momentum from a person rushing inside. He left enough space for the door to open and gave Major the hand signal to wait. The lock clicked. The door pushed inward several inches, stopped, then slammed harder. Vince entered first, his thick shoulders turned sideways and a metal pry tool clenched in one hand. He wore the same Harbor Point jacket, but his shaved head was uncovered and red from the cold. Major exploded forward with a bark so powerful it shook the narrow hallway. Vince jerked backward, caught the paracord with his boot, and crashed into a plastic laundry basket outside the neighboring apartment. The basket collapsed beneath him, sending socks, towels, and an empty detergent bottle across the floor. Major stopped at the threshold when Ryan closed his fist. His teeth remained visible, but he did not touch Vince. Derek stood behind his fallen partner, his slick hair wet with snow and his polished expression stripped away. "Call off the dog," he snapped. Ryan stayed inside the apartment. He already stopped. Hannah stepped from behind the kitchen wall with her phone raised. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not disappear. "Derek Holt, Vince Keller, you work for Harbor Point Property Services, and you are being recorded entering an apartment without permission. The documents from my mother's house have already been sent to my attorney." Derek looked at the phone, then at Ryan, calculating whether fear could still be recovered. Before he decided, several doors opened along the corridor. The first neighbor to emerge was Walter Briggs, a 70-year-old retired city snowplow driver with a rounded back, thinning white hair, a weather-reddened face, and a gray beard that reached the collar of his flannel robe. Years of clearing roads during blizzards had given Walter the stubborn belief that no one should face bad weather, or bad men, alone. He held a short snow shovel across his chest and stared at Vince sitting inside the broken laundry basket. "You boys lost," Walter said, "or are you always this bad at visiting?" Two more neighbors appeared behind him, one already speaking to emergency dispatch. Derek seized Vince by the jacket and dragged him toward the stairwell. Vince tried to stand, stepped on the rolling detergent bottle, and struck the wall with one shoulder. A folded packet slipped from inside his coat. Neither man noticed. They disappeared down the stairs as Walter called after them that the city had plenty of empty jail cells with reliable heating. Ryan waited until the outside door slammed before lowering his hand. Major's bark faded, but his body remained rigid. Hannah picked up the fallen packet. It was a Harbor Point work order for the Whitmore property. Beneath the scheduled clearing time, someone had typed, "Remove all interior contents before transfer confirmation. Do not contact county office until possession is established." Ryan photographed the page and sent it to Rebecca. It was the first written proof that Harbor Point intended to act before ownership had been confirmed. Then Major's hind legs folded beneath him. Hannah dropped beside the shepherd as he collapsed against the doorway. His breathing came too fast and his gums had turned pale. Ryan wrapped him in a blanket, carried him down the stairs, and drove through the snow to a 24-hour veterinary clinic. Dr. Evelyn Carter met them beneath the bright examination lights. She was 51, medium height, with light brown skin, silver-threaded black hair tied at the nape, and calm hazel eyes shaped by 25 years of treating frightened animals and frightened owners. Her voice was gentle but direct. After examining Major, she explained that the exertion had worsened his arthritis and strained his heart, but no bones were broken and his condition could be stabilized. Hannah bent over Major, pressing her forehead against his. Ryan stood beside her, one hand resting on the table. Dr. Carter looked at them both. "He will survive tonight," she said, "but you need to understand something. He cannot keep standing between you and danger forever." Monday morning buried Duluth beneath a heavy snow, whitening the courthouse steps, slowing traffic to a crawl, and turning Lake Superior into a pale emptiness beyond the city. Major remained overnight at the veterinary clinic, resting beneath warm blankets while Dr. Evelyn Carter monitored his heart and inflamed joints. Ryan wanted Hannah to stay beside him, but she stood near the examination table, stroked the silver fur between Major's ears, and whispered that this time she had to be the one who stood up. By 7:30, Ryan and Hannah were heading toward the county offices through streets narrowed by snowbanks. Hannah wore the same oversized brown coat, but she no longer folded inward beneath it. Her chestnut hair was tied into a firm braid, and although exhaustion still shadowed her gray-green eyes, something steadier had appeared behind them. Frank Donovan was waiting when the county records office opened. His silver hair was damp with melted snow, and his old army injury made him lean heavily on one leg, yet he had arrived before the employees. He requested certified copies of the Whitmore deed, tax records, inspection permissions, and every document Harbor Point had submitted. Meanwhile, Rebecca Lane prepared an emergency petition using Hannah's recorded video, the photographs of the surveillance truck, Linda's handwritten notes, and the work order Vince had dropped during the attempted break-in. The typed instruction not to contact the county until possession had been established transformed the case. Harbor Point was no longer merely a company claiming confusion over paperwork. It appeared to be planning to empty a house before it had legal authority to do so. Rebecca told Hannah that the court would need to hear directly from her. "I can explain the law," she said, adjusting her narrow glasses, "but you must explain what they did to you." Hannah's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "What if I say it wrong?" Rebecca's dark eyes remained calm. "Tell the truth slowly. Truth does not become weaker because your voice shakes." The hearing was held late that morning in a small courtroom where wet coats hung from chairbacks and melting snow darkened the floor. Ryan sat behind Hannah, close enough for her to know he was there but far enough to leave the space in front of her entirely her own. Rebecca presented the authorization Hannah had signed while Linda was in the hospital. The language allowed Harbor Point to photograph damage, prepare estimates, and arrange limited inspections. It contained no transfer of ownership, no permission to remove belongings, and no surrender of occupancy. Frank's certified records confirmed that the deed remained in Linda's estate and that no completed transfer had been recorded. Rebecca then submitted the work order recovered from the apartment hallway. The plan had been simple: clear the interior, describe the house as abandoned, and pressure Hannah into accepting that the loss had already become permanent. Before Hannah was called forward, she stepped into the hallway for air. Derek Holt was waiting near the elevator in a dark wool coat, his thin mustache neatly trimmed and his narrow face arranged into the courteous expression he used when cruelty needed witnesses. He did not touch her. He did not need to. "You owe property taxes," he said softly. "Hospital bills, too. Everyone knows you've been sleeping outside. Even if you keep the house today, you'll lose it later. Sign what Harbor Point offers, and at least you walk away with something." Hannah's first instinct was to apologize for standing in his path. Ryan saw it in the way her shoulders started to draw inward. He took one step forward, then stopped. If he spoke for her now, Derek would remain another man she survived by hiding behind someone stronger. Hannah remembered the alley behind the apartment, Ryan's hand showing her how to turn one shoulder, leave herself an exit, and speak without decorating a boundary. She placed one foot behind the other and raised her chin. "Do not come closer to me." Derek smiled. "I'm only trying to help. You entered my home without permission. You sent men to my apartment. You took documents belonging to my mother." Her voice trembled once, then steadied. "You will not speak to me unless my attorney is present." Derek's smile thinned. "You think that former SEAL can protect you forever?" Hannah held his gaze. "I did not mention Ryan." For the first time, Derek looked uncertain. Hannah did not explain. She did not say please. She did not apologize. She turned and walked back into the courtroom on her own. When Hannah testified, she described Linda's illness, the pressure from Harbor Point, the altered locks, the missing belongings, and the attempted entry into Ryan's apartment. She admitted that she had been afraid, hungry, and without stable housing. Derek's attorney tried to suggest that these circumstances made her confused. Hannah answered that poverty had made her vulnerable, not incapable of reading her mother's intentions. The court issued an immediate order stopping the clearing and forbidding Harbor Point or its contractors from entering the property. What began as a 48-hour emergency then expanded into a 3-week investigation. County records showed that Harbor Point had submitted internal maintenance requests before securing ownership. The video identified Derek and Vince at the apartment. Linda's notes matched phone records and company visits. The proposed transfer was canceled. Harbor Point's file was referred to investigators, and Derek and Vince were formally named in complaints involving unlawful entry, intimidation, and interference with a witness. The missing notarized declaration was later recovered from a Harbor Point storage file where it had been placed beneath unrelated repair documents. Linda's signature clearly stated that she rejected every offer to transfer the Whitmore home. Hannah returned to the lake house on a cold afternoon when weak sunlight finally broke through the clouds. Major had been released from the clinic with medication, a support harness, and strict instructions to avoid stairs whenever possible. He moved slowly beside her, his silver muzzle lifted toward the familiar scent of cedar and lake water. Inside, Hannah found the family photograph lying face down on the dining table. She wiped dust from the glass and hung it back in its original place. Ryan stood beneath the picture of Jason in uniform and told her what memory had finally returned. "I don't remember your brother because he did something loud," he said. "I remember him because everyone else was shouting at Atlas to move." Jason sat down in the dirt and waited. He made that dog feel like fear wasn't something to be punished for. Hannah touched her brother's face in the photograph. Tears came quietly. Then, with the deep, uneven breath of someone receiving a piece of a loved one she had never known was still alive in another person's memory. Outside, the porch sagged beneath a thin layer of melting snow. Hannah and Ryan stepped into the pale sunlight while Major rested near the doorway in his support harness. She looked at the broken first step. "Do you think you could help me repair it?" Ryan studied the warped board, then looked at Major lying safely behind them. "One step," he said. "I can do one step." Spring arrived slowly along Lake Superior, first as rain tapping against the repaired windows, then as pale grass pushing through the last dirty banks of snow beside the Whitmore house. 4 months had passed since Hannah returned home. The county officially confirmed her ownership after the investigation closed the false transfer attempt, and Rebecca helped negotiate the medical bills and overdue property taxes into payments Hannah could manage without surrendering the house. Harbor Point was ordered to compensate her for the damaged locks, removed belongings, and unauthorized work, though the money did not erase what had happened. It only gave her enough room to begin again. Ryan had started with the first porch step, replacing the warped board on a cold afternoon while Major watched from the doorway in his support harness. 1 step became 2. Then Ryan repaired the loose railing, sealed the leaking porch roof, replaced a broken bedroom window, and stripped old paint from the room overlooking the lake. He worked quietly, usually arriving before Hannah finished breakfast and leaving tools in careful rows beneath the porch. At first, he told himself he stayed because unfinished repairs bothered him. Later, he stopped needing an excuse. The house no longer felt like a place he was temporarily helping to save. It had begun to feel like somewhere his presence did not need to be explained. Ryan did not recover from his past as neatly as the porch recovered from winter. Some nights, metallic sounds still pulled him awake. Crowded rooms remained difficult, and there were mornings when the weight behind his ribs made answering a simple question feel exhausting. Hannah never treated those days as failures. She left coffee near the window, gave him space, and allowed Major to decide whether company was needed. Ryan eventually began attending a small veterans support group twice a month. He sat near the exit during the first meeting and said nothing. By the fourth, he spoke Atlas's name aloud without feeling as though the room might collapse around him. A local organization later invited him to assist with service dog training several days each week. Ryan refused at first. He believed working with dogs again would reopen everything he had spent years trying to bury. Instead, he discovered that teaching a nervous dog to trust a doorway or guiding a veteran through a grounding exercise gave his memories somewhere useful to go. He still carried grief, but it no longer carried him everywhere. Major improved under Dr. Evelyn Carter's treatment. Medication eased the pain in his joints, regular meals filled out his ribs, and a soft support brace helped his hind legs on longer walks. His black and tan coat regained some of its shine, though the silver around his muzzle continued spreading with dignified determination. Most afternoons he slept on the porch where the sunlight warmed the old boards. He still struggled to his feet whenever an unfamiliar car stopped near the gate. Hannah would place a hand on his shoulder and remind him, You are officially retired from protecting the entire world." Major usually ignored her until Ryan gave the signal to relax. The repaired guest room became the beginning of Hannah's plan. She named the house Whitmore House and opened it for quiet weekend stays to veterans, military families, and travelers caring for senior dogs. She did not advertise luxury. The floors still creaked, the porch leaned slightly toward the lake, and the upstairs pipes complained when the weather changed. What she offered was silence without loneliness, a warm kitchen, a safe yard, and rooms where no one was expected to explain why sleep had become difficult. The first room was named for Jason. His photograph hung above a small writing desk showing him in uniform with one hand resting loosely on Major's neck. Beside it, Ryan placed Atlas's old identification tag in a simple wooden frame. He had kept it hidden for years inside the military trunk, believing grief was safer when no one could see it. At Whitmore House, the tag became proof that Atlas had existed beyond the mission that took him. Hannah placed the faded $10 cardboard sign inside another frame near the entryway. The rain-blurred letters remained visible. Old German Shepherd, $10. Some guests misunderstood it at first, assuming it was a joke. Hannah would explain that the sign had never measured Major's value. It recorded the worst hour of her life and the moment someone finally stopped walking past. Outside, Ryan built a new sign from cedar boards. Hannah painted the letters by hand. Whitmore House. Quiet stays for veterans and senior dogs. They placed it beside the road where lake wind moved through the pines and carried the smell of cold water across the yard. On the morning of the house's first official opening, Hannah stood on the porch in a pale blue sweater, her chestnut hair gathered into a loose braid and her face healthier than it had been beneath the maple tree months earlier. She still felt fear when unknown numbers appeared on her phone or a dark truck slowed near the property. Courage had not erased those reactions. It had simply taught her that fear no longer deserved the final decision. Ryan sat on the repaired step wearing an old work jacket, his dark hair slightly longer and the silver at his temples more visible in the sunlight. A pair of boots rested beside him, one pointing toward the yard and the other turned toward the open front door. Hannah came outside carrying 3 mugs of coffee even though only 2 people drank it. She placed one beside Ryan, kept one in her hands, and set the third on the porch rail beneath Jason's room. She did not explain the ritual, and Ryan did not ask her to. Major rose from his blanket and walked toward them with the slow seriousness of an old officer inspecting completed work. He sniffed Ryan's boots, then pushed the misplaced one with his gray muzzle until it pointed toward the doorway. Hannah laughed. Ryan looked at the boot, then at the open door behind them. For years, he had positioned himself where escape would be fastest. Every unfamiliar room had been measured by its exits, every relationship by how much it might hurt when it ended. This time, he left the boot exactly where Major had placed it. Lake Superior shone beyond the trees. Whitmore House stood warm behind him, and the old German Shepherd settled between the 2 people whose lives he had refused to let disappear. For the first time in years, the door in front of Ryan was not an escape route. It was the way home. Sometimes a miracle does not arrive with thunder, angels, or a sudden change in fortune. Sometimes it comes as an old dog standing on tired legs, a stranger choosing not to walk away, or a key placed on a table. God works through ordinary moments, reminding us that kindness can become shelter, patience can become healing, and one act of courage can reopen a life that grief has closed. In daily life, we may never know which lonely person, frightened animal, or wounded heart is waiting for us. So when the chance comes, choose compassion, choose to stay, choose to help, even when what you have feels small. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment with your thoughts or prayer, and subscribe for more stories of loyalty and grace. May God bless you, your family, and every animal beside you.